It's tricky because GTIs should balance performance and comfort and practicality really well. And does the 230 with DC3 do it better? Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today's video is a classic Volkswizard format. It's a head-to-head test of two Golf GTIs, one of which we've never had on the channel before. This white car is a Mk7.5 Golf GTI with 230 horsepower, so not the performance model. And the reason this has been overlooked so far is because when the cars were new, it was a bit of a no-brainer to pay the extra £1,155 and bag yourself the full-fat performance model. But now the cars are at least 3 years old. Condition and specification can vary an awful lot on the used market. It can be very difficult to bag the perfect Golf GTI performance. So could a nice spec, nice condition Golf GTI 230 make a lot more sense and be all the GTI you could ever need? Well, before we find that out today, let me explain to you how you can buy these two Golf GTIs. Big thanks to VW specialist APS in Brackley, Northamptonshire for the loan of these two GTIs. I'm sure that's a company a lot of you guys have heard of already. And they are two very interesting GTIs. Firstly, because they were owned by a father and his daughter, but also because they've done under 20,000 miles. They've got a full VW main agent service history backed up by receipts, and it's all there on the digital database as well. They've had two owners each, and they've got an unusually high specification. For example, this white silver car has got dynamic chassis control DCC, which is a very rare option on any GTI. So if you're interested in buying them, I'll put a link to the APS website in the description of this video below. And if you've got something similar to sell, then get in touch with me, Andrew at volkswizard.co.uk. Now, before we get started by comparing these two GTIs on paper, I just want to explain to you where the performance model sits in the Golf GTI range. The first Golf GTI Performance came out in 2013 when the Mk7 Golf GTI was launched. It wasn't a specific model, it was just basically a Golf GTI with the optional performance pack. This cost around £1,000, and that gave you the VAQ front differential, an increase in brake disc size, and it gave you an increase in power from the base model's 220 to 230. It was a most definite no-brainer back then. To put it into perspective, you could spend the same amount of money increasing the wheel size from 18-inch to 19-inch, which would probably make the car drive worse here in the UK. But if you went for the performance pack, it would be a much more enjoyable car for the enthusiast and a much closer match to the Golf R. When the 7.5 Golf, or the facelift Mk7 as it's called in some countries, was launched in 2017, the GTI Performance was now a model in the range. So we had two GTIs, the base model with 230 horsepower and the Performance with 245. You still got the VAQ front differential and you still got the bigger brakes. You also got a bit more torque, 350 of the base model versus 370, but actually the base model does seem to perform really rather well, bearing in mind that it hasn't got the VAQ front differential to help put the power down. VW's own figures say 0 to 62 time of 6.4 seconds versus 6.2, and they say that's the same whether it's manual or DSG, but I think they might be lying a bit there, because I reckon a DSG Performance will do it in under 6 seconds, and they really don't want us to know that. This isn't, make no mistake, a really, really quick car. MPG wise, being sensible for a moment, 44 on the combined cycle versus 43. Insurance group 32 versus 33. CO2 emissions roughly the same, but if you go for DSG, the performance pack is a little bit lower counterintuitively, and that's, I think, because you get the 7-speed gearbox. This is a little difference that isn't mentioned in a lot of reviews. If you go for the base model, you get the old 6-speed gearbox, which I'm not a particularly big fan of. If you go for the Performance, you get the 7-speed, the new one that's super smooth, super fast, which I love. In fact, for me, that would be almost as important as the rest of the performance pack to go for the performance model. But we'll see how the two cars compare in the driving section shortly. Other differences is that A base model should have silver badges and the performance model should have red front and back. The bigger brakes mean you get a brake caliper with the GTI logo on it on the performance model. Ride height is, I think, the same, because in the dimensions from VW the cars sit at the same height, and exhaust tips, which are much bigger than on the Mk7s, are actually the same size. At the end of the Mk7.5 run we got the TCR, and when that came into the range the base model was deleted, so the GTI Performance effectively became the base model, and that kind of continued with the Mk8, where we had the normal GTI, which had 245 horsepower and a VAQ limited slip differential, and then we had the Club Sport, which was quite a lot more powerful. Okay, now let's have a look around the outside and the inside of these two very lovely Golf GTIs. Okay, before we start ringing the changes between this white silver 230 GTI and this deep black 245 GTI Performance, I just want to talk about classlessness. It's a term often associated with the Golf GTI. It doesn't mean it doesn't have any class, it just means that you can't define the class of the driver by the car if they're driving a Golf GTI. It's a very hard trick for a car to pull off, but it's something the GTI has done ever since the Mark 1. For example, this GTI might live on a council estate, might have a young owner. You would see it and you wouldn't necessarily think it had been stolen and abandoned there. It would look right there, just as right as this car might look outside a stately home owned by a mature millionaire. You'd see it parked there and you wouldn't necessarily think it was owned by a cleaner who'd come to spruce up his 20 bedrooms. And this has always been a Golf GTI thing, apart from when the factory have made them a little bit too sporty. So say this was a pure grey GTI with black wheels, it wouldn't be as classless. So this is a very important car, the 7.5 GTI, because it does fit in anywhere, but it's still got a lot of performance. This is a very, very fast car, but it's still comfortable and it's still efficient. In fact, for a lot of people, it could be the perfect GTI or even the perfect car. For me as well, I need to spend a lot more time with these because I've pretty much overlooked them in recent years, and I'm actually looking for one for my wife to replace her TT. So if you've got one to sell, it's got to be 5-door and DSG. The rest of the spec I'm open-minded about, then get in touch. Right, let's see the differences then on the outside. So there's not an awful lot in it really. We've got the same bumpers, the same exhaust tips, the same lights, the same rear spoiler. This is obviously a 3-door, the performance model is a 5-door, but you could have a 3-door performance model at this point or a 5-door 230 model. The wheels are the optional brushes. They're 19-inch with 225 35/19 tyres. They would have both originally come on the same Parker wheels, which were 18-inch with 225 40/18 tyres. Interestingly, with 7.5, if you went for 19s, you didn't get wider tyres, which is a bit of a shame because it does help traction, but I think that was because this was when the emissions testing was all in a bit of flux. You had WLTP coming in, which made cars look worse. So yeah, they had to keep the tyres narrow and keep the emissions down. The side of the car is the same. We've still got the red dagger badges, whether it's a 230 or the performance model. But the difference, that's probably the easiest one to spot, apart from the badges, which are red, as I mentioned earlier, on the performance model and silver on the 230. Check out that brake caliper and then check that one out. So on the 230 we get 312mm disc with a very sort of old looking caliper with this cutout here. It could be a Mark IV caliper, that. But definitely Mark IV size disc, 312mm. On the performance model we get a 340 disc with this sort of chunkier caliper and the GTI logo. So this is basically Golf R size brakes on your GTI. At the back we have a similar upgrade actually. So we've got vented discs with quite a big disc as well. You can get your gap, you can get your finger in the gap there. The caliper looks the same, but yeah, this 230 model's discs are a little bit smaller and they're not vented, which does look really quite basic. At the front, it's hard to tell any difference really. There is no difference. You've got the same splitters, we've got the same bumpers, the same LED headlights. Okay, let's have a look inside, see if we can find more differences. Starting with the 230. Now firstly, I just want to point out the options. We've got the bigger screen navigation there with no knobs, and we've got Dyne audio. So they are options on both cars. We've got the standard trim though, this is important. So this is the Jakara Red Tartan, and yeah, it's okay. It's brightens up the cabin, and you get the red stitching on the seats and gear gaiter, steering wheel, plain floor mats, but a bit of red on the sill cover there, which is ambient lighting. The door card though is lacking any colour, which is a bit of a shame. But we do have two different types of fabric, and it does look expensive. And the very faint, is it carbon, is it hexagonal finish to that inlay there, again with ambient lighting on that strip. Let's just get inside. Okay, so being a 7.5, we have the active info display digital instrument cluster. You could spec normal gauges, but I'm not sure anybody ever did. If you did, yeah, brave choice. I mean, you know, I've got a Mark 7, I don't miss these, but yeah, it's kind of desirable when you come to sell them. You've got the same electric parking brake, cup holders. There's nothing missing really from here compared to the performance model. Nice quality plastics, black headliner. So it's still got the sporty looking black headliner, and we've got Dyne audio as I mentioned, so that brightens up the A-pillar trims, which are still cloth on this 7.5. They're not the sort of textured plastic of the Mark 8, which is a little bit sad. Still got black seat belts, but that's the same on the performance model. So yeah, this is the lovely interior, but is it lovelier in the performance model? Now let's talk about the options in here. So straight away you can see we haven't got tartan. We've got art bellows, which was a factory option. We've got the standard head unit, and we've got Dyne audio again. So the options were still, you know, interchangeable between the two models. You could have art bellows on this car if you wanted. You could have tartan on this car, which was standard if you wanted as well. Still got plain black floor mats, still got the sill cover with the red stripe. But the door card's a lot nicer, and I think this is only because it's art bellows. So we've got leatherette here with the red stitching, which looks great. We've got the same sort of hexagonal trim there. So this was a £1,500 option. Leather was £2,500. This is sort of a halfway house, and you get this fake leather, which does look more expensive, particularly on the headrests. And this fabric in here with a hexagonal pattern, which is actually pretty much identical to the seats in the Mark 8 Club Sport, though they've got those sort of pseudo bucket seats without adjustable headrests. Okay, in here it's hard to differentiate between the 230 model. We've got the standard head unit, but actually it's still quite nice. We've of course got the active info display, dual climate, same shifter, same gaiter, same cup holder, same black headlining. This is the later model though, so it's got the SOS function on here, which means you can track it with the Volkswagen app, which is pretty cool. Same sunglasses holder. Is the mirror different? Let's see. This is the one with the plastic trim on the outside of it. And this is the one without a trim, but that's not a performance thing. That's just because this is a slightly later car. Yep. Still got black seat belts as well, so if you want a bit more colour, I think you have to buy the TCI. You get the funky red trim mats with those as well. Okay, now let's have a look under the bonnet, where there are clearly some performance differences, but let's see if they look different under there. Okay, well, there's actually less difference under the bonnet than I was expecting, but then I kind of forgot that these are actually the same basic engines. These are two sort of lower power EA 888s. If you had a Golf R or a Club Sport or a TCR, you'd have the higher power EA 888, and that would then mean there might be some things in different places. The only differences here are to do with the model year. So this is an earlier car, 2017, but it's got a different coolant cap to this one, and we haven't got a lid, a cap on the battery there, while we do here. But there's one nerdy way to tell this is the performance pack car. It's sorry, this is a performance pack car. If you look down there, you can see the heat shield over, I think, the drive shaft on this car. Bear in mind they're both DSG automatics. You can actually see a big alloy casting down there, and that's the VAQ front differential. Engine code wise they are different, but I think only because this one is older than that one. So this older 230 is a CHH engine code, this newer 245 is a DKT. Okay, so there's not a lot of difference under the bonnet. Will there be a lot of difference in the way they drive? Well, let's go and find out. Okay, well, I thought we'd start off then with the GTI 230, the base model. I've got to admit one thing, this car's got dynamic chassis control, which was a factory option. It's about £885, and even on these 19-inch wheels, it feels compliant. I'm going to run it in normal mode, which will give us the most level playing field we can get, although it feels a lot more compliant than the performance on 19s, but we'll see when we go back to back over this bump. Yeah, it mops it up. It's not underdamped. It's good. I don't think there's any difference in the chassis tuning, but I could be wrong, because looking at the brakes, you know, there's actually quite a bit of difference there. Going to this corner at speed limit 60, and it just feels right. Brakes. There's nothing wrong with those brakes. Let's just keep driving now to cool them down a bit. Maybe the stopping distance will be a tiny bit longer, but the big benefit with the bigger brakes is that they'll just have more legs on a circuit where you get them really hot. These will start to fade a lot sooner. So on the road, I wouldn't say it was that important. Let's just try a standing start on this road. It's pretty quiet. We're not going to use launch control, we're just going to use the gearbox. I'll put it in manual mode. Don't stop on me now. Okay, let's just go. Yeah. So it didn't take long for one wheel to spin up. That's the problem with a normal diff, because an open diff is designed to make a car go around corners without there being sort of wind up. A locking diff will open up for corners, but it will tighten up when it senses one wheel spinning. On this car, we've got the ABS system braking a wheel, but there's no way it can be as efficient as VAQ. So it's not a car for drag racing. Does that make it a bad GTI? No, it doesn't. It's lovely. Is it quick? Well, let's just try 40 to 60. That's 40, that's in third. Let's try this. Third, drop to second, third. Yeah, definitely something happens about 4,000, but traction control then, and we weren't even trying that hard. These Pirellis are not really the best tyres. But yeah, in this mode, it's got some exhaust noise, sounds genuine. Let's just put it into sport for this corner. So we're in third gear. The chassis is firmed up because we've got DCC. Feels magic. And then on the brakes, you should be able to take this about 60. Yep, 60 dead. Over this sort of crest on the corner, it feels lovely and controlled. Wow. I'm really impressed. Okay, we can't do drag races and the brakes may not stand up to track days, but if you don't do drag races or track days, I think a DCC equipped 230 might be the better car, and I wasn't expecting to say that. Well, let's now go and drive the GTI Performance and see if I'm not just talking rubbish as usual. Well guys, welcome to the GTI Performance with all of its 245 horsepower. So 7-speed DSG, it's a different box and it feels sharper for sure. Passive dampers, on this car, and actually it's not as hard as I thought. It's quite well judged. Mk7 Club Sport with these wheels and passive dampers I find pretty undrivable. This is just about okay, but with DCC it would be more than okay, it'd be brilliant. But you know, it's still a lovely car to hustle. The brakes, there wasn't an awful lot in it, you know. Yeah, on track, obviously 340s are a lot better than 312s, but yeah, there's definitely a bit more of exhaust noise. That's in normal mode, so that's not even a loud mode. So I think when you're at cruising speeds and cruising revs, it's quite enough. There's definitely a bit more, which is interesting because they look the same, the exhausts. So yeah, it's slightly busier on this imperfect road, but it's in no way terrible. There's still a round edge to the ride, and then when you get to the corner you don't brake, you just turn. Who needs big brakes? Overtake, and then overtaking still brilliant. We've got enough power onto the brakes and into second. It's not complaining. That's second, a bit of a nasty corner that, and then no traction issues coming out of the corner. Let's just do a standing start again now. So hazards on, let's go. No ESC intervention at all, and we're on exactly the same Pirelli tyres. Oh man, this feels so lovely. That was quite fast. Okay, this is a tricky section with a bit of float on the way in. Fine, crest on there. Fine. Damn it. I enjoyed that as well, a lot, in a different way as well. It just felt a bit more aggressive. Ooh, it's tricky because GTIs should balance performance and comfort and practicality really well. And does the 230 with DCC do it better? I don't know. Well guys, it's been very tough to decide between these two GTIs today. As you know, I'm a big fan of the GTI Performance, but I'm also a big fan of DCC, Dynamic Chassis Control. So to choose between a GTI Performance without it and a GTI base model with it is really hard, but I think I've come to a decision. Now the GTI Performance is one of the all-time great GTIs, there's no doubt about that. It's the way, it's still really classless, but thanks to the hardcore hardware underneath its butter wouldn't melt exterior, it will still give some track day specials a bloody nose, both on a circuit and on the road. The base GTI is a great car too, but it's not as good a hot hatch, but it's certainly not the badge engineered disaster the Mark IV 2-litre GTI was back in the late 90s. Okay, it's not the best choice for track days, but only motoring journalists will hold that against it. Traction will be more of an issue on this car than the VAQ equipped Performance model, but the base model still got XDS, which uses the ABS system to limit slip, and that's more than the Mark V Golf GTI had, and nobody complains too much about a lack of traction with that car. The less slick 6-speed DSG gearbox of the base model is a distinct step back from the Performance model's super slick 7-speeder, but it's still a really good automatic gearbox. If that is an issue, then get the manual, because that's equally slick in both cars. And it adds significantly to the fun factor. And then we have DCC, dynamic chassis control, which on these cars was only fitted to the 230. On the open road, both cars actually felt quite compliant at sort of 50 to 60 miles an hour. But with the cameras off, I drove back here on slower urban roads, and the performance model was a lot more uncomfortable, while the DCC equipped 230 was relatively plush and still had the even more compliant comfort mode to fall back on. Now, unlike power outputs or diffs or brakes or even gearboxes, suspension influences the car virtually all the time, and it's for this reason, between these two GTIs, my choice would be the DCC equipped 230 model, which is a car I'd be very happy to run as my own daily driver, but only while I'm looking for a perfect spec DCC equipped GTI Performance. As ever guys, thanks for watching this Volkswizard video. Keep commenting, I do read them all, keep subscribing, and I'll see you for the next one very soon.